At 3 a.m. in the gleaming towers of Morrison Financial, security cameras captured something that would change everything. A janitor collapsing in the executive hallway, clutching his chest as chemotherapy bags fell from his work cart. What the Millionaire CEO found in that janitor's locker 3 days later would expose a secret so devastating and so inspiring that it would transform not just one company, but an entire community's understanding of what true strength really looks like. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart through the marble corridors of Morrison Financial Tower. It was 11:30 p.m., and the building's 42nd floor was empty except for the soft hum of computers and the quiet shuffle of his uneven footsteps. His left leg, weakened by childhood polio, dragged slightly behind him, a reminder of the fever that had changed his life at age 7. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Marcus had learned that limitations were just starting points. What the executives passing through these halls during the day didn't know was that the quiet janitor emptying their trash cans had once held an acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins Medical School. What they couldn't see beneath his Navy uniform was the IV port hidden under his collar, or the prescription bottles tucked between cleaning supplies in his cart. 6 months ago, Marcus had received 2 phone calls that changed everything. The first was from his daughter Emma's school. She'd been accepted into the gifted program and needed new textbooks. The second was from his doctor with test results that made his hands shake. Stage 3 lymphoma. That night, sitting in his rusted Honda outside the oncology clinic, Marcus made a decision. Emma was 12 years old, brilliant, and still believed her father could fix anything. He wouldn't be the one to shatter that faith. "Dad, why do you always work nights?" Emma had asked last week, curled up on their second-hand couch doing homework. Their apartment in East Cleveland was small 1-bedroom that Emma used while Marcus slept on the couch, but it was home. "Someone has to keep those fancy offices clean, sweetheart," he'd said, forcing a smile. "Besides, it pays better than day shift." The lie came easily now. The truth was harder. His $32,000 annual salary barely covered rent and groceries, and the night shift was the only way he could schedule chemotherapy during Emma's school hours. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd finish work at 6 a.m., drive straight to University Hospital for treatment, then pick Emma up from school at 3 p.m., pretending his exhaustion was just from a long night of cleaning. The medical bills were crushing him. Even with the company's basic insurance, each treatment cost hundreds of dollars he didn't have. He'd already sold his late wife's wedding ring, pawned his father's watch, and taken on extra weekend shifts. Still, the debt kept growing. Marcus paused at the executive elevator, steadying himself against his cart. The nausea had been getting worse since yesterday's treatment. Dr. Peterson had warned him about pushing himself too hard. But stopping work meant losing insurance. Losing insurance meant no treatment. No treatment meant leaving Emma alone. He thought about the Stanford acceptance letter he still carried in his wallet, 15 years old, creased from handling, a reminder of dreams. Deferred but not forgotten. When Emma's mother died in that car accident, Marcus had made a choice. Medicine could wait, but his daughter couldn't. Now, watching Emma excel in advanced mathematics and science, he wondered if she might follow the path he'd abandoned. If she did, he'd find a way to pay for it, even if it meant cleaning offices until he was 80. Marcus reached the executive floor, where CEO Jonathan Morrison's corner office dominated the western wall. Through the glass doors, he could see Morrison still at his desk, surrounded by papers and computer screens. The man worked as many late hours as Marcus did, though for very different reasons. As Marcus began emptying the wastebaskets in the outer office, a wave of dizziness hit him harder than usual. He gripped the edge of a mahogany desk, waiting for it to pass. The chemo drugs were taking their toll, but he had no choice but to push through. The hallway stretched before him, gleaming. Marble floors reflecting the soft lighting. He'd cleaned this same corridor thousands of times, invisible to the people who shaped financial empires from behind these doors. Marcus took a step forward, then another. His vision blurred at the edges. The crash echoed through the empty building. As his cart overturned, sending cleaning supplies skittering across the floor. But that wasn't all. That scattered 4 bags tumbled out from a hidden compartment, along with prescription bottles and medical documents he'd been concealing in his work supplies. Jonathan Morrison, hearing the commotion from his office, would step into that hallway and discover the secret Marcus had been fighting to keep. Neither man could predict that this moment would change not just their lives, but the lives of hundreds of people who thought they understood what real strength looked like. This is the story of a father who chose silence over self-pity, a daughter who saw heroes in everyday places, and a CEO who learned that sometimes the most powerful people in your building aren't sitting in corner offices. Sometimes they're holding mop buckets. Jonathan Morrison had been staring at the same quarterly report for 20 minutes when the crash echoed through the executive floor. The sound was sharp and jarring in the building's late-night silence, like glass breaking, followed by the metallic clatter of something heavy hitting marble. He looked up from his computer screen, listening. At 11:45 p.m., he was usually the only person left on the 42nd floor. Security made rounds every 2 hours, and the cleaning crew typically worked the lower floors first. Another sound reached him, a low groan, distinctly human. Jonathan pushed back from his mahogany desk and walked to his office door. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Near the elevator bank, he could see an overturned cleaning cart, its contents scattered across the marble like debris from a small explosion. And there, lying motionless beside it, was a man in a Navy janitor's uniform. "Jesus," Jonathan muttered, rushing forward. As he got closer, he could see the man's face. It was Marcus, the quiet janitor he'd passed countless times over the years, but never really noticed. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy with sweat. But it wasn't Marcus's condition that stopped Jonathan cold. It was what had spilled from the cleaning cart. Among the scattered bottles of disinfectant and rolls of paper towels were things that didn't belong. 4 bags filled with clear liquid, orange prescription bottles, with labels he could read even in the dim light: ondansetron, prednisone, rituximab, cancer medications, and scattered papers that looked like medical bills and insurance forms. Jonathan knelt beside Marcus, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. "Marcus, can you hear me?" The janitor's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "When?" He saw Jonathan's face hovering above him. Panic flickered across his features. "Mr. Morrison?" Marcus tried to sit up, his gaze immediately darting to the scattered contents of his cart. "I'm sorry, I must have tripped. I'll clean this up right away." "Don't move," Jonathan said firmly, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No," the word came out sharper than Marcus intended. He struggled to sit up, despite Jonathan's protests. "Please, no ambulance. I can't afford. I'm fine. Just got dizzy for a second." Jonathan looked at the man's pale face, then at the 4 bags and prescription bottles scattered around them. Understanding began to dawn, piece by piece. "Marcus," he said quietly, "how long have you been sick?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus's shoulders sagged as he realized there was no hiding it anymore. His secret was literally spilled across the floor. 6 months, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Stage 3 lymphoma. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. For 8 years, this man had been cleaning his office, emptying his trash, maintaining the space where Jonathan built his financial empire. And all this time, Marcus had been fighting cancer alone. Does the company know? HR? Anyone? Marcus shook his head. I can't lose this job, Mr. Morrison. I have a daughter. If I can't work, I lose the insurance. If I lose the insurance... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Jonathan helped Marcus to his feet, steadying him when he swayed. When was your last treatment? Yesterday morning. That's why this happened. The medication makes me weak sometimes. Yesterday morning, and you worked last night? Marcus nodded, avoiding Jonathan's gaze. I work every night except weekends. Emma thinks I just get tired from the long hours. Emma? My daughter. She's 12. She doesn't know about the cancer. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. She lost her mother when she was a baby. I can't. I won't let her think she's going to lose me too. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, processing this information. He thought about his own daughter, Sarah, who was 14 and attended private school in Manhattan. Her biggest worry was whether she'd make varsity soccer next year. How are you paying for treatment? Jonathan asked. Marcus gestured weakly at the scattered medical bills. Barely. The insurance covers some of it, but the co-pays, the deductibles. I've sold everything I can sell. I work extra shifts when I'm strong enough. Jonathan picked up one of the bills from the floor. The amount made him wince. $847 for a single treatment. He thought about the watch on his wrist, which had cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus, why didn't you tell anyone? The company has programs for executives. Marcus interrupted gently. Not for janitors. And besides, who would believe that someone like me could handle this? I'm already disabled. Add cancer to that, and I become unemployable. Someone like you. Marcus met his eyes for the first time. A janitor with a limp who never went to college. Jonathan felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name. Shame, maybe. Or anger at a system that made a man hide his illness to keep his job. We need to get you to a hospital, Jonathan said. I can't afford the EA. I'll handle it. Marcus looked at him with surprise. Why would you do that? Jonathan thought about it for a moment. Why would he? This man was technically an employee, but they'd never spoken more than pleasantries. Yet something about Marcus's quiet dignity, his determination to fight this battle alone rather than burden others, resonated with him. Because, Jonathan said, helping Marcus gather the scattered medications, it's the right thing to do. As they waited for the elevator, Jonathan realized that in 8 years of building his financial empire, he'd never done anything that felt as important as this moment. He just didn't know yet how much this encounter would change both their lives. The emergency room at University Hospital was quieter than Jonathan expected for a Thursday night. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Marcus's bed, watching the fluid drip steadily into the janitor's arm. The doctor had confirmed severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance, common side effects of chemotherapy that Marcus had been ignoring for weeks. Mr. Williams needs to rest more between treatments, Dr. Chen had explained to Jonathan, assuming he was family. His body is under tremendous stress. Working full-time while undergoing aggressive chemotherapy is not sustainable. Jonathan had nodded, not correcting the assumption. Someone needed to advocate for Marcus, and it seemed like no one else was in line for the job. Now, 3 hours later, Marcus was stable but groggy from the medications they'd given him. Jonathan checked his watch. 4:30 a.m. In 2 hours, Marcus would normally be heading home to wake Emma for school. Mr. Morrison? Marcus's voice was hoarse but clearer than before. You didn't have to stay. Someone should be here, Jonathan replied simply. Marcus tried to sit up, wincing. Emma, I need to call my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She has a spare key. Emma will be looking for me when she wakes up. Already handled, Jonathan said, pulling out his phone. I called the school and spoke to the principal. Emma's teacher knows you're not feeling well and that Mrs. Rodriguez will be picking her up today." Marcus stared at him. How did you know about Mrs. Rodriguez?" "I may have looked up your emergency contact information in HR." Jonathan's tone was matter of fact. "She sounded very concerned about you. Apparently, you've never missed picking up Emma before." For the first time since Jonathan had known him, Marcus's carefully maintained composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears. He quickly tried to blink away. "I promised her mother," Marcus whispered. "Before she died, I promised I'd always be there for Emma, that she'd never have to wonder if someone would show up for her." Jonathan felt something shift in his chest. He thought about his own daughter Sarah, whose biggest concern was whether he'd make it to her soccer games between business meetings. "Tell me about Emma," Jonathan said. Marcus's face lit up despite his exhaustion. "She's brilliant. Straight A's, loves science and mathematics. She wants to be a doctor." He paused, a bitter smile crossing his face. "Funny how life works, isn't it? I wanted to be a doctor once too." "Wanted to be?" Marcus reached for his wallet with shaky hands, pulling out a worn piece of paper. He handed it to Jonathan, who unfolded it carefully. It was an acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, dated 15 years ago. Jonathan read it twice. "You were accepted to Johns Hopkins?" "Full scholarship," Marcus said quietly. "I was going to specialize in pediatric oncology." "Ironic, considering I'm now the cancer patient instead of the doctor." "What happened?" "Emma's mother, Lisa, died in a car accident when Emma was 6 months old. Drunk driver ran a red light." Marcus's voice was steady, but Jonathan could hear the old pain underneath. "I had a choice, medical school or raising my daughter. It wasn't really a choice at all." Jonathan looked at the letter again, imagining the young man who'd received dreams of healing children, of making a difference in the world, abandoned in an instant because love demanded sacrifice. "Do you regret it?" Jonathan asked. "Never," Marcus said without hesitation. "Emma is the best decision I ever made, even if it wasn't really a decision." Over the next week, Jonathan found himself thinking about Marcus constantly. He'd arranged for Marcus to take sick leave with full pay, something that required creative interpretation of company policy, but he couldn't stop wondering about the man's daily life. On Friday afternoon, acting on an impulse he couldn't explain, Jonathan drove to East Cleveland. The address from Marcus's personnel file led him to a rundown apartment complex, paint peeling from the siding and weeds growing through cracks in the sidewalk. He climbed to the second floor and knocked on apartment 2B. The girl who answered the door was clearly Emma. She had Marcus's intelligent eyes and determined chin. She was small for 12, with braided hair and paint-stained fingers. "Hi," she said cautiously. "Are you looking for my dad?" "I'm Jonathan Morrison. I work with your father." Emma's face brightened. "You're from the cleaning company?" Jonathan paused. Marcus had never told Emma what building he cleaned or who he worked for. Something like that. "Is your dad feeling better?" "Much better, thank you. Mrs. Rodriguez said you helped him when he got sick at work." Emma opened the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" "Dad's taking a nap, but I can wake him up." "Don't wake him. I just wanted to check on you both." Jonathan stepped into the small apartment, struck by how clean and organized everything was despite the obvious poverty. Emma's school books were spread across a card table that served as both dining table and desk. Science fair certificates hung on the walls alongside crayon drawings that were clearly much older. "Are you working on homework?" Jonathan asked. "Science project," Emma said proudly. "I'm testing how different variables affect plant growth. Dad helped me design the experiment. He's really smart about science stuff." Jonathan looked at the carefully labeled plants arranged by the window, each with detailed charts tracking growth measurements. The work was sophisticated, more advanced than he'd expect from a 6th grader. What do you want to be when you grow up, Emma? A doctor, she said without hesitation. Specifically, an oncologist. Dad says cancer is like a puzzle, and if you're smart enough and work hard enough, you can solve it. The irony hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Marcus was fighting cancer while encouraging his daughter to become the very thing he'd given up being. The man was literally living his abandoned dreams through his child. That's a wonderful goal, Jonathan managed. Dad says I can be anything I want if I work hard enough. He never went to college, but he reads all my science books with me. Sometimes I think he's smarter than my teachers. If only she knew, Jonathan thought as he drove back to his penthouse apartment in downtown Cleveland. Jonathan couldn't shake the image of Emma's proud smile when she talked about her father. Marcus wasn't just hiding his illness from his daughter. He was hiding his entire past, his intelligence, his abandoned dreams. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt like he was seeing clearly. Success wasn't just about building wealth or climbing corporate ladders. Sometimes it was about a man giving up everything to raise a daughter who believed he hung the moon. And sometimes, Jonathan realized it was about using your privilege to make sure good people didn't have to fight their battles alone. For 3 weeks, something extraordinary had been happening at Morrison Financial. Jonathan found himself looking forward to the evening hours when Marcus returned to work, not because he enjoyed staying late, but because their conversations had become the highlight of his day. It started with simple check-ins about Marcus's health, but evolved into something deeper. Jonathan would bring coffee from the executive kitchen, and they'd talk while Marcus worked. Marcus shared stories about Emma's science projects and her dreams of medical school. Jonathan found himself describing his own daughter Sarah's struggles with teenage rebellion and his regrets about missing so much of her childhood while building his company. "You know what Emma asked me yesterday?" Marcus said one Thursday evening, carefully dusting Jonathan's bookshelves. "She wanted to know why I never went to college. What did you tell her?" "The same thing I always tell her, that not everyone gets the same opportunities, but that doesn't mean you stop learning." Marcus paused. "But she's getting older, asking harder questions. Sometimes I think she sees right through me." Jonathan had been thinking about this conversation when he made the decision that would change everything. On Friday morning, he called his assistant with specific instructions. "I want you to contact Johns Hopkins Medical School. Find out about their part-time evening programs, financial aid, anything that might work for someone with Marcus's background." "Sir," his assistant asked, confused. "Just do it, please." That afternoon, Jonathan received a call that made his hands shake with excitement. Johns Hopkins had launched a new program for non-traditional students, working adults who wanted to complete their medical education through evening and weekend classes. Better yet, they offered full scholarships for exceptional candidates who demonstrated both academic merit and life experience in healthcare-related fields. Jonathan's mind raced with possibilities. Marcus's experience as a cancer patient, combined with his obvious intelligence and dedication, could make him a perfect candidate. Emma could have her doctor father, and Marcus could reclaim the dream he'd sacrificed. He was still planning how to present this opportunity when his secretary buzzed his intercom. "Mr. Morrison? There's a reporter here from the Cleveland Business Journal. She says she has an appointment." Jonathan's stomach dropped. He'd completely forgotten about the interview Rebecca Chun had scheduled weeks ago about Morrison Financial's corporate social responsibility initiatives. Rebecca Chun was known for her aggressive investigative style. She'd built her career exposing corporate hypocrisy companies that preached social responsibility while exploiting their workers. "Mr. Morrison," Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from his desk with her digital recorder. "I'm doing a feature on how Cleveland's top companies are supporting their most vulnerable employees. What programs does Morrison Financial have for workers facing medical crises?" Jonathan answered carefully, describing the company's standard benefits package and employee assistance programs. But Rebecca wasn't satisfied with corporate talking points. "Let me ask you this," she said, leaning forward. "Do you personally know any of your employees who are currently facing health challenges?" Something in her tone made Jonathan cautious. "Why do you ask?" "I've been investigating working conditions for service employees in Cleveland's financial district. Night shift workers specifically. Janitors, security guards, food service workers. I'm particularly interested in how companies handle situations where these workers become ill." Jonathan felt his chest tighten. "I'm not sure what you're getting at." Rebecca pulled out a photograph and placed it on his desk. It was a security camera image showing Jonathan and Marcus in the hallway the night of Marcus's collapse, medical supplies scattered around them. "This image was provided by a source who works in your building's security department," Rebecca said. "They tell me you've been personally involved with a janitor who's been hiding cancer treatments while working full-time. They also say you've been bending company policies to give him special treatment." Jonathan stared at the photo, his mind racing. "Where did you get this? Sources aren't important. What's important is the story. A wealthy CEO discovers his janitor is fighting cancer and suddenly becomes personally involved. It's either a beautiful human interest story about crossing class lines, or it's a perfect example of how broken our healthcare system is when people have to hide life-threatening illnesses to keep their jobs. This is a private matter. Nothing's private when it involves workplace safety and employee rights," Rebecca interrupted. "I'm going to run this story, Mr. Morrison. The question is whether you want to participate in telling it accurately." Jonathan felt trapped. Any story about Marcus would inevitably expose his medical condition, his financial struggles, and his hidden intelligence. It would shatter the privacy Marcus had fought so hard to maintain. "I need time to think about this," Jonathan said. "You have until Monday. I'm running this story in Wednesday's edition." After Rebecca left, Jonathan sat in his office staring at the photograph. He thought about calling Marcus immediately, warning him about what was coming. But something held him back. That evening, Jonathan stayed late hoping to catch Marcus during his shift. He needed to figure out how to handle the situation, how to protect Marcus from unwanted publicity while still maintaining their newfound friendship. But Marcus never showed up for work. Concerned, Jonathan called the number from Marcus's personnel file. The phone rang several times before a young voice answered. "Hello, Emma? This is Jonathan Morrison. Is your dad there?" "Oh, hi, Mr. Morrison." Emma's voice brightened. "Dad's in the hospital again. He collapsed this morning during his treatment. Mrs. Rodriguez took me to see him, but the doctors say he needs to rest." Jonathan felt his world tilt. "Which hospital?" "University Hospital, room 314. But visiting hours are over now." After hanging up, Jonathan sat in the growing darkness of his office, the security photo still lying on his desk. In 3 days, Marcus's private struggle would become public knowledge. The quiet dignity with which Marcus had faced his illness, his determination to protect Emma from worry, his sacrifice of dreams for love, all of it would be dissected by strangers who didn't understand what real courage looked like. And there was nothing Jonathan could do to stop it. For the first time since this all began, Jonathan understood what Marcus had been trying to protect. It wasn't just his job or his insurance. It was his right to fight his battles on his own terms, with dignity intact. But that right was about to be taken away. And Jonathan felt responsible for every invasive question that would follow. Monday morning arrived like a storm cloud. Jonathan sat across from Rebecca Chun in his office, the security photo between them like evidence in a trial. He'd spent the weekend at Marcus's hospital bedside, watching Emma read her father's science articles while Marcus slept, and he'd made his decision. "I'll give you your story," Jonathan said quietly, "but I want to tell it my way." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Marcus Williams isn't just a janitor fighting cancer. He's one of the most remarkable men I've ever met. And if you're going to expose his story, then people need to understand who he really is. Jonathan opened his laptop and turned it toward Rebecca. On the screen was Marcus's personnel file, but also something else, the Johns Hopkins acceptance letter. Employment records showing 8 years of perfect attendance despite his illness, and Emma's academic records showing straight A's and advanced placement classes. This man gave up a full scholarship to medical school to raise his daughter alone. Jonathan continued. He's been fighting stage 3 lymphoma while working full-time, not because he's reckless, but because he's the sole provider for a 12-year-old genius who wants to be a doctor, just like her father once dreamed of being. Rebecca studied the documents, her expression shifting from skeptical to fascinated. "And here's what you don't know," Jonathan said, his voice growing stronger. "This morning, I'm announcing the Morrison Foundation's first annual Marcus Williams Scholarship. Full tuition, room, and board for children of Morrison Financial employees who demonstrate exceptional academic merit and financial need. Emma Williams will be our first recipient." "That's very generous, but I'm not finished." Jonathan stood up, pacing to the window. "Marcus has also been accepted into Johns Hopkins Evening Medical Program. Full scholarship. He'll complete his medical degree while working reduced hours here as our employee wellness coordinator, a new position I'm creating specifically for him." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "You're offering this because I'm writing the story?" "I'm offering this because it's what should have happened years ago." "You want to write about how companies treat their most vulnerable employees?" "Right. About what happens when a company actually pays attention." When the story ran on Wednesday, it wasn't the expose Rebecca had planned. Instead, it was titled, "The Janitor Who Never Stopped Being a Doctor: How One CEO Learned What Leadership Really Means." The article told Marcus's story with dignity and respect, focusing not on his poverty or illness, but on his intelligence, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to his daughter. It described Jonathan not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a business leader who recognized that his company's greatest asset wasn't in the executive suite. It was emptying trash cans on the night shift. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country for the Marcus Williams Scholarship Fund. Medical schools called offering similar programs for non-traditional students. Most importantly, dozens of other companies began examining their own policies toward employees facing medical crises. 6 months later, Jonathan stood in the same hospital corridor where he'd first truly seen Marcus as a person. But this time, they weren't in the emergency room. They were in the pediatric oncology ward, where Marcus was completing his clinical rotations as a first-year medical student. "Dr. Williams," a young patient called out, and Marcus's face lit up in a way Jonathan had never seen before. "Not yet, buddy," Marcus laughed, adjusting the boy's IV line with practiced hands. 3 more years, but I'll get there." Emma bounded down the hallway in her volunteer uniform, now 13, and even more determined to follow in her father's footsteps. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez is here to pick me up. I finished filing all the patient education materials." "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll see you at home." As Emma hugged her father goodbye, Jonathan marveled at how much had changed. The scared, exhausted man who'd collapsed in his hallway was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to glow with purpose. Marcus still had his limp, still faced 3 more years of challenging study while managing his cancer treatments, but he was exactly where he belonged. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus said to Jonathan as they walked toward the elevator. "Yesterday, Emma asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. For the first time in 15 years, I could give her an honest answer." "What did you?" "Tell her that I wanted to be exactly what I am, her father, and a doctor who helps sick kids get better. And that sometimes the best dreams are the ones that wait for the right time." Jonathan thought about his own daughter, Sarah, who'd recently decided to volunteer at a homeless shelter instead of joining another exclusive club. Somehow, Marcus's story had changed more lives than just his own. "Marcus," Jonathan said as they reached the parking garage, "I have something for you." He handed Marcus an envelope. Inside was a check not from the company, but from Jonathan personally. Enough to cover Emma's undergraduate education at any university she chose. "Jonathan, I can't." "Yes, you can. Because 15 years ago, you chose love over ambition. Today, I'm choosing to invest in what love can accomplish when it gets a second chance." Marcus stared at the check, tears in his eyes. "Why?" "Because," Jonathan said, thinking back to that night when he'd found a man lying unconscious surrounded by the evidence of a secret battle, "you taught me that real leadership isn't about being the most powerful person in the building. It's about lifting up the people who are already doing extraordinary things that nobody notices." As Jonathan drove home to his penthouse, he realized that the janitor who'd once cleaned his office had done something no business school could teach. Marcus had shown him that success wasn't about what you accumulated, but about what you were willing to sacrifice for the people you loved. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the world noticed your sacrifice and decided to help you reclaim your dreams. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.